this is kind of like a more general topic, and it's obviously like a really controversial one in terms of like discussion about startup acquisitions and actually acqui-hires in particular. There's like a whole range of opinion about it. On one end, there are people who are like, oh, this is really great for innovation. There's like, these big companies with resources, buying startups and kind of encouraging them to keep doing what they're doing, with you at them as accountable. And then on the other end, there are people who are like, it completely kills innovation. This is like, you're basically selling out, there are people who are very, very negative about that. So, obviously, all of you are coming from the point of views of people who've had successful acquisitions. I was wondering if you could basically maybe tell me a bit about what you think about that topic. What does acqui-hire do in terms of tech innovation?
Do you want the grumpy old man version, or do you want like?
Grumpy old man version.
Yeah, I'm good at that, so that's fine. I'm not a fan of that particular practice. I think it is a attempt of the larger acquiring company to get away with something inexpensively. And it's not really a sellout, but it does dilute the brand that you just built up. And I've had one company that I founded wound up becoming a tech fire sale, essentially. The company did well and competed against our competitors. They won, and then they essentially purchased the technology from us. And that, although it wasn't an acqui-hire, people did go over and work at the other company. And it's a little bit of a funny trick, and I don't really feel comfortable with it, and it doesn't. I don't think it bodes well for the industry if it becomes something that's popular.
Okay, so I'm going to just take a second to define what an acqui-hire is for people in the audience, because my guess is that's not a common term. So an acqui-hire is kind of commonly refers to buying a company basically just for the value of the people in the company. So you're not buying it for the technology, you're not buying it for the brand, you're not buying it for the product. It's purely for the people. These deals tend to be like between $3 million and $10 million, maybe stretching to like 15, but they're they're small M&A deals. So that's what an acqui-hire is. In terms of what I think about them, so I'm actually pretty bullish on the notion of acqui-hires for a couple of reasons. One is people, when I look around Google at the people that we have acquired that fit into that category of acqui-hire, they are some of the best people at Google. Like, they're really good. So from Google's perspective, these are people that have been acquired in Google that are performing really well and helping Google change the world. And they're doing a great job at it. And that they kind of had the personality characteristics to be people who tried to start something and tried to get something off the ground and took that risk and really pushed the envelope, that says something about them. And it turns out that when they come into Google, they're often very, very successful inside Google. So I like that, it's a place where Google can go to find people who are particularly good, not all the time, but a lot of the time, and have them perform. The other thing is, there might be this mantra of, oh, acqui-hires hurt innovation. There's another very strong theme that's kind of rolling through Silicon Valley right now, which is actually the exact opposite, which is there are way too many small startups right now, and it's destroying innovation because there are way too many small startups. I'm in that camp. Right now, there are so many, you stop someone randomly on the street in San Francisco, say, what are you doing? The person says, I'm an entrepreneur. And it's like, really? What are you starting? And it's some company that you hear the idea and it's truly a feature, right? It's truly not something that can potentially change the world, but rather it's something kind of small. And when you think about that company, it's going to attract some people to it. And those people can either work on something that's small, or they can work on something that's really big, right? That can really potentially change the world. And so a lot of times acqui-hires will happen when a company does form and people try to change the world around something, but they realize it's more of a feature than something that will truly change the world. And so those resources that have been put in that company are better placed against a bigger thing that actually has the opportunity to truly go and change the world. So, you'll hear a lot of people talking about this in Silicon Valley now, where it is so hard to find awesomely talented people to work on really big problems. And one of the reasons is that so many people are working on these very, very small startups, and then they're not available to work on the really, potentially really game-changing things. So acqui-hires are one way that our system kind of self-regulates to make sure that that talent ultimately goes to work on really big problems.
Yeah, so I might have a slightly different take on it, not being in Silicon Valley. Yeah, as you can see, this is a controversial topic. That's why I have 3 different opinions on it. I believe that one of the key, requirements for a healthy startup ecosystem is the ability to exit a company at any stage. And in Silicon Valley, it's very easy. It's not very easy, but if you're going to sell a company for $1 billion, it's entirely possible in Silicon Valley. If you're going to sell for $5 million, it's entirely possible. And in Boston, there are fewer anchor companies that can do these types of deals. You don't have a Twitter or a Facebook to buy, small social startups. You don't have, Microsoft and Google now are present, but they're not actively buying small companies outside of their core locations in Silicon Valley. And so, for me, I sometimes wish that there were more of these types of deals in Boston because, what happens is you take a couple guys who have a passion that's self-identified, to solve a problem. They've got some experience. They, get it going. Okay, great. Now you go work in the big company for a couple of years, get that experience, you make some money, so you can now either reinvest it or start your next company and not have to raise money immediately. So there's a lot of benefits to someone, selling a company. And in Boston, maybe it's similar here in Seoul, but it wouldn't be a bad thing if there were more deals happening in Boston. So.
That's why actually I wanted to ask each of you about your plans now that you're an acquisition that Twitter or in Rob's case, you've been through several acquisitions. So Pat, because you chose not to go to Twitter, you're now the entrepreneur resident at Polaris. Can you tell me a bit about what your plans are?
Sure. So in not going to Twitter, I joined the venture capital firm as a primary investor, and so my position there is entrepreneur in residence. That's a very, I think, strange and industry-specific term.
Explain it.
Yeah, so it's basically a sponsored entrepreneur, and I really sort of have 3 things I'm supposed to be doing. So actually looking at their deal flow, helping them decide, what companies to invest in, working with their portfolio companies, and then researching if and or what next company I would want to start. In some ways, the 3rd thing is the hardest there because I think you never want to start a company when you have a gun to your head. Just because someone's saying, hey, go research and start a company doesn't mean that you should. I think they say repeat entrepreneurs are more successful, statistically, and of course that's experience, because of the experience they have, but I also think it's just because they're more selective. Having gone through the hell of a startup, I'll never start another one unless I'm really confident that it's going to succeed. And so I don't like the notion of being in this position, someone saying, hey, you should be researching which next company to start. On the flip side, it's tremendous because access to meet with people, not being worried about paying bills, obviously it's a paying job, things like that, and really taking time to to disprove ideas is fantastic. So I really, I've only been there for 3.5 years, so it's very short. But I really am enjoying it. It's a very unique opportunity, I think, unique to technology, and then even, it's a hard job to get. So.
Yeah, Seth, I remember on Skype we were talking about, there's always the possibility that you will found another startup, even though at Google Plus right now you're kind of taking advantage of the opportunity, the resources you have, and kind of experience working there. So I was wondering if you could tell me about kind of what kind of factors would make you want to leave Google and become a founder again?
So, what I'm the way my mind thinks about this is, if you're at Google, you should be working on things that you can only do if you're at Google. So there are certain problems in the world that are just really, really big, that are really challenging, really, really hard. Like, I want to change the world and make it do blah. And if you're Google, maybe you can actually do it. So if I can work on those kinds of problems and actually believe that I have the potential to make the, find the solution and put it in market, then it's worth being at Google. But if I can't do that and I find a problem that I'm really passionate about that says, oh, like this one would be better done as a startup, because there are problems that are better done as a startup than better done at Google, then I'd go do it as a startup. So, for the time being, I get to work on problems at Google that I think like Google is uniquely positioned to do, and so that's a lot of fun. And I guess I'm the only person on this panel who's still at the company that acquired them. And I imagine it'll be like that for a while. But when we talked, I said, 3 years is infinity in tech land. So I have no idea what I'll be doing in 3 years.
We did get free dry cleaning at Discovery, so that was part of my decision. Well, sleeping, there'll be sleeping. Like that will be definitely happening. But I'm already looking at the next thing to do. So I'll start the activity of collecting the people and putting together plans for going forward. I told people this in the past, it's kind of like peanuts for me. It's like once you have one, you have to keep doing this. And I'm assuming the oldest one in the family. I'm 53, and I've done 8 of these, and 6 have actually borne fruit. So it's a pretty good average. So I'm looking at what I'm going to be doing next. I'm looking at the people I'm going to be doing it with, and we'll see what happens.
So I was thinking about, yes.
Sorry, I have a quick question. Just for those of you and for the people in the room, I think they might benefit from understanding the types of jobs that don't translate into moving to an acquired company.
Sure.
I can think of 2 job categories that automatically get axed, but I was wondering if the 3 of you could talk about the types of job titles that don't come along when a company is acquired.
Sure. I mean, it's there are certain setbacks of life, and but in the case of the purchase by Discovery, the department that did not survive that transition really was the financial group, right? Because it's a small company financial organization, and here's Discovery with bankroll people doing all that stuff. And so that got pulled in. Everyone was very well treated and very well taken care of. But yeah, that was something that didn't make the transition. The sales organizations became one. They merged and they absorbed, and that was also expected. Technology was left alone. As a matter of fact, we're driving the technology inside of Discovery at this point, and production was left alone.
So what about Meebo's case? Like, who didn't make the transition every single go?
Yeah, so it's actually just totally variable company to company. Almost always, like Rob said, the general and administrative, so things like finance, accounting, FP&A, anything in that bucket tends to not transfer over. That's not a global statement though, because sometimes actually the acquirer wants to just have the company operate completely independently, and so they even would keep G&A in there. But in Meebo's case, for example, the G&A folks did not come over. And then what you do, when I said, I cared a lot about the people and we looked a lot at what was happening with the people in the deal, equally important to me, even more so, was not just the people going to Google, but the people who would ultimately not go to Google, right? And what happened to them in the deal and how the deal, fared for those folks. So you just are very careful if you're doing it right to make sure that your entire team, because it's your team and it will have been your team for forever. So you are very careful that your entire team, regardless of whether they're transitioning or not, is treated super well.
I agree with both of what they said. Just the one point though is that not everyone is decent. So I did the same. Really fought hard to make sure people landed well in Twitter, outside of Twitter. But you want to, if you're considering working for a startup, that's one of the reasons why you want to work with good people. There's, a lot of opportunities for founders of companies to play tricks in the end. And I think, what you're hearing, one of the most important things, apparently the three of us, is if you want to start another company, you better do well by people during that phase where, word will spread and no one will ever work for you again. And so if you're going to work for a startup, I would really, try to understand the guys or women you're going to be working with, because it's really important.
지금부터 저기 그 Q&A를 좀 이따 시작할 거거든요. 그러니까 그 퀘스천 할 거를 갖다가 생각해 보시고요. 이게 제가 한국에서 많이 컴퓨터 하면은 정말 질문들 안 하시더라고요. 근데 이건 아주 좋은, 정말 직접 스타트를 했고 스타트를 해서 거기서 지도자로서 구글이나 트위터나 디스코드 같은 데 파는 사람들이 여기 모여 있는 거잖아요. 이런 기회가 많지가 않은데 미국에서 그렇게 흔치 않거든요. 그러니까 질문하실 거 있으면 다음으로 질문하세요. So I told them that, usually in Korea they don't ask a lot of questions. I said this is a really good opportunity, so they should, just ask questions.
Yell at us.
Okay. So I just opened up.
Go ahead. So can we get them a microphone, maybe? Okay, you just have to speak up.
Okay, so in your particular cases,
This works perfectly. I can hear you absolutely fine.
that's great. In your particular cases, if you were on the other side of the table as the acquirer, what would you have done differently in your negotiations or merging of the organization?
저기요, 혹시 지금 한국말로 그게 트랜스레이트 됐나요? Okay, so he needs to use the mic. Okay.
Yeah, of course.
So we'll try that one more time. Okay, and then you guys could use this.
There's another one.
That one's not working. There you go. I'll let you control it.
Thank you. So in your particular cases, if you were on the other side of the negotiating table with the acquirer buying your company, what would you have done differently than the people on that other side did, either in the negotiations or in the implementation, merging of the organizations?
I would have paid more money.
That's correct.
I think Twitter went to great lengths to understand what we built. I wish they understood it better. Because often in the conversation, when you're talking about value transfer, I intimately know what we're offering. They're just offering, dollars or shares or a role or responsibility. So for them, it's pretty easy to make that offer. And for me, oh, but what about this other thing that has value? What about this other thing? And so I just wish that, we spent a ton of time. I just wish we could have spent more time understanding what they're buying.
There's, Google is a very large company at this point, and so there's someone who does every job function like under the sun, including people, of course, who do M&A deals. So in the M&A deal, we spent a lot of time talking to the people who do M&A deals, and less time talking to the people who run the business that was acquiring us. So I would have preferred to spend a little more time with the people who run the business that are acquiring us. And of course, now that I'm on the other side, I see the benefit of, from Google's perspective, of not having that happen. So for example, it saves everybody time, right? Like I can keep doing my normal day job. We acquired a company, for example, recently, and I didn't have to, spend too much time on it. Other people did, which was great, and the people magically appeared. It's like, awesome, we have good people here now. And it kind of lets, other people, kind of deal with the nitty-gritty of negotiating. But just spending more time with those folks would be good.
Yeah, that's a tough one. So Revision had spent a tremendous amount of time building a tech platform that was serviceable for anyone at any scale. And that's part of the reason Discovery purchased us in the first place, and they understood that going into it. But I don't believe that everyone in the Discovery organization understood that going into it. So I think there was a lack of communication within the Discovery organization about what this meant. So there were already people there that had attempted to build a digital delivery platform for discovery internally that were not brought into the M&A conversation. And that was probably a tactical and political mistake within discovery. Right? So I would have included more people in that conversation. You can understand where this is leading. So.
This will be my last question, I promise. I'm interested because what we can say is that all of you had exits. What is the role of philanthropy in your lives now as opposed to in the past? And the answer could be, of course, that nothing's changed. But there are feelings in the valley, generally speaking, that with wealth creation there should be some sense of social or community sort of payback. And I'm interested if anybody in the acquiring company spoke to you about it, whether you saw increased philanthropy amongst your peers or colleagues who also became part of the new company.
Nobody in the acquiring company speaks of that kind of thing. But that's an excellent question. In my case, I've gone through this a few times, and I'm part of a philosophy of belief that you do give back to the entrepreneurial community. I mean, we're all here. So there's some of that. So there's the lending of your own knowledge, your own domain expertise, and the stuff that you've gone through, and then there's the financial aspect of it as well, which I think we all take part in our own ways. But when the company that's doing the acquisition is making the acquisition, no one is. The nicest way to say this is there's no altruism involved, right? It is a transaction for cash or for stock or for people or for something. And it's the receiver of that cash, stock, or people that does the right thing or not.
Write bigger checks.
My primary philanthropy since starting the company has been spending more time with my wife. After several years of stress and hell, it's good to kind of focus at home. We sold the company for stock, and Twitter's going to have an IPO, and there's a lockout period. So, I actually don't, in my pocket, have $1 today more than I did before the deal closed. So I'm not going around giving a lot of money around. I am doing what Rob's doing, though, which is trying to get back in terms of time and domain expertise. So in Boston, in particular, spending a lot of time with students. So a lot of colleges these days, and in Boston, it's Harvard, MIT, have entrepreneurial centers for their students, and they bring people in. So I spend a lot of time working with those organizations.
I think most everybody in the room gets the fact that when a company is acquired, it'll be necessary to make a move to integrate your teams. But before that happens, at the creation stage, which a lot of people in this room are at, creating your businesses, assembling the talent, and maybe having a very good idea. For the big companies especially, because they have great girth and a tremendous ability to reach out and source talent ideas, are they doing a better and more active job at discovering talent at its location, be it Israel or Asia or around the world? Or is it still somewhat the case that you got to show up at the door of Silicon Valley before you really get any attention?
Yes. So in Boston, we did not have trouble both partnering with and ultimately selling the company to organizations in California. But it was a great, personal, effort. So, we had to go foster those relationships. We had to get on a plane. I mean, at dinner last night, I was saying, in the 8 months before the company was sold, I was in California on average every 9 days. So that's a 6-hour flight, so it's not, a lot of fun going back and forth like that. So I do think that it's still mostly inbound. If you reach escape velocity, then they're going to find you. But if you're not at escape velocity, then you need to go find them. And we really, 8 months before, like I was saying, we had a conversation, what are our options? We very strategically even altered our product roadmap in order to be more appealing to more types of companies. We added keyword search. We didn't have that previously because we thought that would get us in the room with search companies, for example. So that's how we may or might not have talked to certain people. So I'd say you need to be better.
Generally speaking, it's just a lot easier if you're in Silicon Valley. Even though everybody loves to say our industry is the one that makes it possible for so much of communication and kind of globalization to happen, which is true. But our industry is also the first to recognize that it's a lot easier to work with people that you see and interact with face to face. Google, we tend to like to have teams locally co-present with each other, so it would be very hard. For example, my group, we have people in Seattle and we have people in Mountain View in California. It'd be really hard for me to want to acquire a company in like Boston, because that would mean a new location. It would be a lot easier if it were Seattle or Silicon Valley for my particular group. Someone in another group where they have a product team in Tel Aviv and a product team in LA, they may be open to companies for their groups in those areas. But generally speaking, working together, face to face is so much easier, and so that is a big deal on the M&A side. In terms of partnering, I agree with Pat. Like, partnering can happen no matter where companies are, but it means you're getting on a plane and going to wherever the principals in the company are that you want to partner with, right? If they're in Idaho, then you're in Idaho a lot, and if they're in Mountain View, then you're in Mountain View a lot. It's again the same thing, right? It's all about face to face. I happen to be in town. Do you want to get together for a meeting and coffee? I happen to be in town.
Yeah, data and processing and everything else, and do what they did for the web on the mobile side. And so they took out their checkbook and they bought 7 companies. And MQ was one of them. There was one in Vienna, there's one in Berlin, there was one in Toronto, there was one in down the block in Montreal, kind of nowhere, and then there was one in South America. And all of that happened very, very quickly, and it turned out that MQ was the largest of those companies that got purchased, so all of the executive teams, myself included, wound up controlling that specific section of the company you had control over before, at just a larger scale. So I had engineering for all of mobile for VeriSign, for the time that I was at VeriSign, and I was on the plane all of the time. And I was in Vienna, and I was in Toronto, and I go back to Boston, and I go back to Montreal, and it doesn't stop. So it does depend on the company, and there's, but I agree with these guys. I mean, if you really want to get the attention of the Googles and the Yahoos and whatever, you have to have a presence of some sort, probably.
I'm curious to know what rules your existing investors in facing. Like, for example, if you had a seed funding or Series A funding, did they help you with the negotiation? Did they discourage you by any chance? Were there any frictions?
That is your job as part of the executive staff, right? And the board does get involved in a lot of the partnering conversations, but they are not typically involved in the M&A due diligence itself.
Yeah, there's this real myth that once you take VC money, the VCs then run the company. That might be true for really bad VCs, but for good VCs, they recognize that they're investing in a management team, and the management team runs the company. So, our VCs had almost nothing to do with the M&A deal at all. At the same token, they never told us what to do. They never told us what product to build. In board meetings, if I'd ask, like, what do you think we should do, Wula, who is from Sequoia, he'd be like, well, you can do A or B, and here are pluses and minuses of each, but he would never even have the appearance that he was telling me what to do. Because it was always like, no, you're the CEO, you decide. And that is really important, right? Like those people do not spend all day, every day working on that company. The good ones know that, right? I once had a friend of mine come to a lunch with me. He was like an hour late, and he looked like really stressed when he got there. He's like literally sweating. He's like, he just looks terrible. I'm like, what happened? He's like, my board meeting. I was like, what? My board meeting went for 5.5 hours. I was like, how did your board meeting go for 5.5 hours? Like, oh, we got into this whole like product debate and then product ideation, and I was like, dude, you have to take control of your board meeting. Like, you can't do that. So it's really important. Like, the VCs can fire the CEO, but they don't run the company.
Yes, same. Almost no involvement whatsoever. You know, there was, you know, typically you say, hey, I think I'm selling the company. They say, oh, well, don't you think there's more value? You know, don't you think that we should stay independent? And there's a really simple test, which is, okay, I need more money. Do you want to write a check? And that'll flush that out pretty quickly. So, you know, this is the upside, I need $5 million. And so they said, no, you should sell the company. So, and that's the same calculation you're doing with regard to your own time, right? You're trying to decide, do I want to put another 2 years into this? Do I think this is the right time to sell it? You know, it's dollars versus years. So it gets everyone on the same page pretty quickly.
One more question.
Yeah, last question. 여기 계시는 분들이 대부분 이제 나이가 어린 학생들이나 아니면 여러분들처럼 레퍼런스가 되게 좋은 사람이 없는 사람들도 많이 있을 것 같은데 그런 사람들이 만약에 투자를 받으려면 어떻게 해야 될까요? So my question to you is, as a student or someone with little reference or little work experience, what advice would you give to them in getting investments?
So I love technology because it is the great equalizer. You know, you hear about a student in a dorm who builds something and it takes off, and it doesn't matter that they have no experience, they're going to have 10 guys banging down the door writing them a check. That said, the single best way for you to demonstrate that someone should write you a check is to put your own time into something and to actually be committed to doing it. You know, you hear a lot of people say, I'm an aspiring entrepreneur. Well, what are you working on? Well, I'm not working on it until I can get money. And so if you walk in the room and you say to someone, hey, I want $1 million and then I'll get started, they'll say, you know, if you're not committed enough to already have dedicated your life to this, you know, no way. So, you know, you could work on it on the side, you know, in order to make it work for you in your life, but you really need to put, you know, effort into it and do whatever it is. You know, if you can't code, but you can do the other things, then you need to do those other things. And, you know, especially attracting a team, you know, my advice is always just, you know, don't go try to hire 5 people. Try to get one guy to help you solve one problem. And I think one of the great things about engineers is once they're working on something, they tend to get excited. So if you can go, you know, find one person to help you, just get a little bit of traction. That's the way to do it. So I was just thinking, get started.
Yeah, so a lot of times early entrepreneurs think they should go looking for investment first and that's what starts a company, but that is not what starts a company at all. More than anything, the thing that starts a company, like Pat said, is team, right? It's what is the co-founding team. Look at all of the multi-billion-dollar outcomes in Silicon Valley. Google, multiple co-founders. Facebook, multiple co-founders. YouTube, multiple co-founders. Apple, Cisco, Oracle. The list goes on and on. It doesn't stop. It's always multiple co-founders. So I would argue, before you have an idea, before anything, find your team. Once you have the team, which by the way should be a bunch of 2 or 3 people with synergistic skills. Like, people have a bad habit of hanging out with people who are exactly like them. I once had 3 MBAs, 3 business students come to me and say, we're going to start a consumer internet company. And I said, that's awesome, but you're all business people. Who's going to build the product? And they said, oh, we'll find some students to do it. And I was like, well, you're screwed. So, find 3 people who are, synergistic skills. Then build it. Like build a prototype, like get an alpha out there, prove that it's really awesome. At some point you will need money because you're getting more users and you have to buy more servers and you can't afford it, right? You can't afford the cost of scaling. That's when you need money. And then everyone and their mother will just like write you a check. So, oh my God, like, they need money to pay for servers because they have so many users. Then you're great.
That was excellent advice from both of you guys. The only thing I would add to it, I mean, first of all, yeah, get out there and do it yourself. You know, just show some passion in what you're doing and build what you're doing. And it's the people that you hang out with and the team that you build, and make sure, yes, that the skill sets are aligned and compatible, but not exactly the same. And the only thing I would add to this is when you pick your co-founders, for the love of all that is holy, pick people that you like. Pick people that you can work with day in and day out for years. And you have to think of it that way. And you know, it's like, oh, this guy's got the skills I need. I don't really like him or her, right? But you have to, because if you don't, then you know it's painful. It is painful.
Okay, I think we ran out of time, so we thank the panelists, guys. Thank you very much. 아까 그 타이 asked the question. 아까 타이가 그 질문했잖아요. 그 charity, the